all that personal information that you've seen put into a Confluence page, customers' credit card numbers, that shouldn't be there. Your company's secrets, details of the next acquisition.
What options do people have? Hey everyone, welcome back to the Summer of Atlassian. Today I got Matt Doar, and we're going to be talking about scary things. And so Matt, welcome. Thank you so much for signing up and helping us with our initiative here this summer. I'm excited to talk about this presentation. Anything that you want to add?
No, I'm excited to be here too and looking forward to it.
Perfect. So this is going to be mainly Matt talking, but there's going to be a dialogue. So we'll be shifting around and showing presentations and screens. So we'll give it over to you, Matt. So let me start this.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, so the topic for discussion is things that worry me in Jira and Confluence. And this is not just the usual concerns about your configuration and how do you set up the workflow and what kind of schemes are you going to use in Jira. This is about scary data. You might say, well, I'm sorry to hear you're worried, Matt. Why should you care? And the answer is that you too probably have scary data in your Atlassian tools. You see this guy looks scared? I think he's actually scared because he's forgotten how to put his cap on the correct way around. But that
all the cool kids wear like that.
Grumpy old man moment there. So who am I? I'm a long-term Atlassian partner. Last 20 years, I've been a consultant. I've administered some huge Jira instances for various people. Written 2 O'Reilly books about Jira. I'm also still one of the Atlassian community leaders in San Francisco, and I've recently joined Adaptivist. I'm hoping that this T-shirt comes out the right way where I don't have to move
loud
my
and
screen.
clear, Adaptivist.
Okay, all right, cool. I've got a title of head toolsmith, so you're probably going to think to yourself, what is a toolsmith? And I'll save that till the end. Alex, if I forget to explain what a toolsmith is, can you remember to say, hey, Matt?
Absolutely. No, and I'm kind of glad that I didn't introduce you as world-renowned book author because you had your slide here.
Yeah, you know what? It's a big community, but it's not that big. All right, let's do the next one.
Well, one real quick thing though, when
Sure.
we were just joking about this off camera, right? You technically are the OG Dr. Jira.
That is true. That is true. But you know, you've got to pass these titles on. So Alex says Dr. Jira on his little name tag, and that's just fine by me. All right. Do you like that one animation for this whole presentation? It took me ages to get it right. Scary data. So thinking about what do I mean by scary data? Well, you've probably seen some of this, but I wanted to just list out a few of the different things to really drive it home. All that personal information that you've seen put into a Confluence page, customers' credit card numbers, that shouldn't be there. Your company's secrets, details of the next acquisition by your legal team, legal cases. Back in engineering, bug reports from your customers that have screenshots and passwords and log files. And these are all the secrets of your customers. And then you've got all those security vulnerabilities you found on your company website or in your products. Your own source key, the private SSH keys, passwords. Oh, so many passwords we've seen in bug reports. And then there's just all the rest of it. The moment you start thinking about attachments and what could be in an attachment, it's a complete nightmare. Next one, please.
Before we go on, though,
okay.
What options do people have, though? Because I think before we went to the cloud, right, all of this information used to live in an Excel file. It used to live in a Word document. But you own that Word document. You own that Excel file. But now even Microsoft 365 is on the cloud, right?
Right. So where do we put these secrets? How do we keep ourselves reasonably safe for reasonable inconvenience? And that's where the next slide goes. I don't want to overplay this. It's like all security discussions, right? You're going to have some balance between what you're trying to do and inconvenience, because security is essentially the art of making the inconvenient livable. We know nothing's going to be perfect. There's always going to be mistakes creep through. But what really matters is that we've got a process in place for continual improvements. A phrase I like to use is risk reduction, not risk elimination. And that's illustrated by the picture of this person working on live wires from a cherry picker, is what I believe we would call it in this country, being America. So you notice this fellow is still wearing a hard hat because he's dealing with up to 1,000 volts, 55,000 volts, I should think, and he's poking a stick at it. But it's important that he's wearing a hard hat because that further reduces the risk, but not eliminates it. So there's only 3 scary stories here, though I've got a lot more that I could tell over a beer with you sometime. The first one that I remember very clearly, and boy, did this get quick reactions, was HR was using a Jira project to track all of the new joiners, the people being onboarded. You know, 1 issue per new user, makes sense. But of course, somebody thought it was a good idea to put the starters' salaries into each of these issues. And the project wasn't particularly locked down, which made it fascinating browsing for everybody. You could just go in and see everybody who joined this big company and exactly what they were being paid, and they could all compare it, which is a big no-no in the US culture in particular. So
not in the state of California. We have transparency.
Yeah.
Transparency now.
You try putting the CEO's salary and paycheck into the HR project. See how that goes. So that was one. The next one that got, well, it was embarrassing how long this data, this scary data, was available for. The social media company, and any kind of social media company is going to have abuse. That's the way of the world. And we have to have ways to reduce the appalling things that people type in public. So 98% of this got caught automatically. That was fine. And the remaining 2%, there was a whole big team that was specially trained and given counseling about dealing with these awful things that people wrote. And of course, they had to track all of these 2% of awful things that they found manually, and they did it in Jira. So when you started to look at the list of all the summaries of all the issues in this project, it was just mind-blowing. All the death threats and self-harm and again, that had been left open because it's all within the company. Why can't we just leave that open? And the fact that even the admin of the tool, me as the admin of the tool, was horrified by what this data was, didn't really seem to affect their thoughts about how the data was being stored. Anyway, last one, and this is maybe more because of my English background, but big company wanting to track important visitors, very important people coming to visit the company. It was a Silicon Valley thing. And they said, where should we track this data? Because as you say, at that time, they were just using a local spreadsheet. I don't even think it was a shared spreadsheet. I think they just emailed it backwards and forwards. And I said, well, yeah, you could do that with Jira. We could lock it down. You've given us notice and told us what you want to do with this. And then they said, well, this is for heads of countries coming to visit Silicon Valley. And we would have the dates of exactly where they're going to be and when. And I thought to myself, no, I don't want to have that data. I don't want to be responsible for somebody assassinating somebody and starting off World War III just because I couldn't get the Jira locked down. You wonder. So no, that was one of those cases where I said, yes, the Atlassian tools are able to do this kind of thing. And yes, we could start with it being secure, but because you would have to run security checks on all of your Atlassian admins, we don't recommend that you store this data in an Atlassian tool. Go store it somewhere else. And in the end, they did. I very carefully never asked whether they're still just using an Excel spreadsheet. It's possible.
So a couple of things that do come to mind. In Jira, we have issue level security. Does that ever play a role into how you consider what data you put in there or not?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's a great feature as far as it goes. But remember that all of the Atlassian admins are set up as a collaborative tool, so they're able to modify their permissions so that they are able to view whatever data it is. And yes, that change will appear in the audit log, but still, you've now got a situation where the person that you've hired for your Atlassian admins, and maybe they're not even your company, maybe it's a third-party organization in some other
Mhm.
country is now able to see where heads of your country are at different times. If I were the security team for the King of England, I'd not be very happy about that.
Yeah, it does make you wonder a little bit then about what we actually put into our tools, because as we mentioned earlier, right, you kind of don't have an option. You don't really have a choice nowadays, right? You almost need to put your data in there because it's the collaborative tool of choice nowadays.
So there's a wrinkle to that I'm going to come to in a later slide, which is what do you do when you say, okay, I don't think that the Atlassian toolset is an appropriate toolset for this. And it's not because it couldn't be secure, but it's because how is it all set up with the admins? Who eventually gets to see it? And what's the audit process? You'd have to go with the people.
So yeah, so it almost then sounds like you kind of like a security clearance for the United States government, that the background investigations that they do here, you kind of do want to audit your admins a little bit more, right? Because
Oh, yeah.
non-disclosure is might not just be enough.
Right, exactly. And outsourcing the admin of your tools, that's a very serious issue in this case as well. I mean, yeah, probably 99%, no, maybe 95% of the data that goes into Atlassian tools isn't sensitive. And that's great. It's wonderful for collaboration. But it's really important that we're all aware of the cases when it is sensitive. And we should be documenting and choosing very carefully when we use them.
So a couple more things that come to mind that are related, right? What about HIPAA? What are your thoughts on the HIPAA compliance and the
Yeah,
hoops that folks need to go through in order to store HIPAA data in Jira?
right. Which is a great start. And Atlassian is making good progress with this, both cloud and
But all they're
on-premise.
doing is stripping the data from the emails,
Right.
but
But
it's still in the ticket.
you see, there is no perfection, right? We were saying the trade-off between the perfection of absolutely zero HIPAA or PII sensitive data versus the inconvenience of it all. If you went for 100% perfection, then we would never use any of these tools. They would become impossible to use. So we know there's going to be some flaws, some risks of this, but we can always do a much better job if we think about it beforehand. And one of the things that comes up in a few slides is that it's all about thinking about this before the data gets in there.
Yeah. Now you are bringing me into something that's pretty interesting as well as we pivot over to the discussion of FedRAMP, right?
Oh,
So as
yes.
you know, FedRAMP is something that we're waiting for eagerly. It's on Atlassian's roadmap, but that roadmap seems like it's almost as long as Rainbow Road on Mario Kart. And
got to get the Mario reference. Got to get
a Mario reference in there, right?
Yeah.
But so in the have you ever worked in a classified environment?
No, I have not. Being
Okay.
English, that would be one extra level. English and American citizen, but it would be another level to get through.
So historically, right, just without trying to land myself in jail, let me see what I can and can't disclose, right? But historically, the Jira that is used in a classified environment is offline, right? It's in a closed area, networked off from the internet. So it's really just a repository of data, because everybody that has in there has access to it to a certain degree, but not the outside world, not the internet, not anybody outside. And the different teams that have utilization for Jira, they have their own installation.
Yeah.
As you know, this stuff's going away. There is no more server.
Well, no, there will always be a case for on-prem, I believe. And actually, while Atlassian's making money from that, I think there will always be a product for it too.
So we may or may not, within the Atlassian community here through our side channels, we may or may not have gotten someone officially on record saying that there is an end of life for data center. And even data centers might not be appropriate for like a small little team, because these are usually like small little 20-person top secret project teams, right? So you don't need a full data center. But the reason I'm bringing this up, right, is FedRAMP, I'm assuming, takes those items, puts them into the cloud, and locks things up, but only locks them up until a certain level, because like you said, right, the admins still have access to everything, and all classified data is on a need to know basis.
Right. So there's the rub, isn't there? starts to get very awkward. But there's a lot of other scenarios. If we go down this discussion of the cloud versus the on-prem, I could see Atlassian spinning off a separate company. I mean, let's blue sky, right? Separate company that just does on-prem version of some different product name that's the successor to Jira, which you and I have talked about already, about just for this purpose.
It reminds me when Netflix tried to spin off its DVD service.
Oh yeah, that's right. That didn't fly, did it?
That did not fly very well. So I wonder how that will work out for Atlassian. We make our on-prem business. But it is an interesting discussion, and one that like maybe Atlassian in the future is working on more granular levels of administrative power, right? Because right now, and you can kind of see it, they're doing it already, right? We used to have this site admin role that could do everything, but I don't know if you've dug around the newer instances of Jira Cloud. We now have a product admin who can manage the product and the users, and there's now a new user group admin who they can't do Jira workflows, they can't do screens and require fields and any of that, but they can see from admin.atlassian.com they can manage users. So we're starting to see Atlassian starting to break out some granularity as to what different types of admins can do.
I think that's going to be a future. I mean, it's also been a past request for 20 years, is to change the granularity of a different admin permissions. Oh, one other interesting note is that Confluence admin and Jira admin have always been subtly different. There were the other groups in Confluence that you could set up admins who didn't see as much. But Jira admins has always been slightly coarser. And once you were a Jira admin, you were
pretty much see everything.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to see what Atlassian does, but yeah, I'm after this presentation, I'm a little bit more nervous now.
Well, we should. Being scared is good. It's a healthy reaction. So those were the three scary stories that came to top of mind, particularly the last one. So what can we do about it? Well, as Alex and I have just been talking, understanding your data and understanding the use case and really who needs to see it and documenting that is the first step. And then the fact that you're going to be continually improving that documentation and the plan, and then going back and verifying that your Atlassian administrators have set up what you think they've set up, what they're supposed to set up. And that requires some kind of auditing. So what about the question of how do you audit an Atlassian system to confirm that it is set up as you expect it to be? That's challenging because you have a written description of what and who is supposed to be able to view this space or this issue.
Well, not only that, but the content's user generated, right? So if you had like a single focal coming in and saying like, okay, here's a document that I uploaded and everything's funneled through that bottleneck, that's one thing. But the fact that anybody and everybody can create something, there's just some people that just don't understand how to follow rules.
All right. And that is why I have a slide about user training coming up in a few.
Okay. We don't want to spoil that.
No, I like the way you're thinking. Let's go there. Here's a list of some of the helpful approaches. Just when you start to think about the data that you've seen in all of these Atlassian systems, and you think, how can I capture the data? How can I stop it going in? And once you've accepted the fact that nothing is going to be perfect, then you can start with some of the apps that are out there. These use regular expression checks, and they look for stuff that looks like social security numbers, stuff that looks like passwords, and warns you about them. Or after the fact, will say, looks like we've got some problems here. And that's not bad as it goes. I've certainly found that I've caught a few passwords floating around in issues. Even the next better step is that you've got some people in the process, in the workflows, and the eyeballs on issues to see that unwanted data is not appearing in your tools. Restricting the data beforehand, so this is part of the training, and saying to people, you shouldn't be putting this kind of data in, and if you do have to, well, here are the places where you should put it in, and some of the data you shouldn't even be putting in this tool at all. You should be looking at another tool, and I'm not going to say which one it should be or shouldn't be, but it's not the tool that I'm responsible for. It's not this Jira, and it's not this Confluence. So in the end, it all comes down to the people who are using these Atlassian tools and their education. which leads to the next slide.
Before we go that far, though,
yeah.
Quick question.
Mm.
We're talking about admins accessing the data, right? We're talking about basically folks that maybe don't have a need to know, but can because the data is there and they have the ability to get access, can see it. But what about Atlassian itself?
In the cloud. Well, yes, there's the question, isn't it? It's somebody else's computer, but how much do you trust that someone else? What are your guarantees on them? Which government and country are they responsible to?
Right, because I mean, Atlassian not being a US-based company, right? That puts an interesting angle on stuff.
I mean, technically, I think they are listed on the stock exchange, but yeah, I know what you're talking about. Their first allegiance.
There's a lot of Chinese companies in the stock exchange, Matt. We're going to put our data there.
I'm not going to say TikTok, but yes. Yeah. But
it's an interesting thing, right? Because like even Apple, right, when ChatGPT was taking off in popularity, I saw reports of like Apple's basically prohibiting the usage of ChatGPT because people are putting their queries for their personal problems into this tool that then gets fed into this model, right?
Right.
And you can't help but also wonder with the advent of or the introduction here of Atlassian Intelligence, right? What is Atlassian doing with those queries, right? Because you're feeding a lot more data to Atlassian now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is exactly the same argument people had about Google 25 years ago. That you're giving away information by asking questions. You ask these questions of Google as this magic oracle out there, and those questions could be sensitive. But it turns out we live.
Now, I'm kind of curious to get your 2 cents on this then, right? So I see GDPR on there and privacy being a thing, right? But I'm of the belief, and maybe we might stop being friends after you hear my belief.
Oh dear.
But I'm of the belief that you're on the internet, right? There isn't any, the word privacy isn't a thing anymore. Like, it is very hard to be private on the internet nowadays, right?
Yeah.
And you see initiatives or efforts like GDPR where they're trying to force technology companies to be more private or to respect the privacy of their end users. But at the same time, end users want the convenience, right? Like, what if people want the data there?
Exactly. It's the security convenience balance that we're always trying to strike again. And I think that I like the idea of pressing technology to acknowledge that there are problems and plan it beforehand. Because of course we know how hard it is to delete data if you haven't thought about deleting it beforehand. It's really tough, technically.
There's no magic button like on Google where you can just purge your account.
I had so many sad conversations with legal teams who would say, all right, so I want you to just run your algorithm that will strip out all the PII just to make it GDPR compliant, this tool. I'm like, sorry, doesn't exist, not even. But we've come to terms, I think, our generation with, if I can include you in that generation, with the lack of privacy, whatever I say. It doesn't mean that it's a good thing, but it is what it is at the moment. So our children, I think, are just better trained to be aware of it and where they're losing it.
I think, I mean, it's going to make for a very interesting world. I think trying to balance out, like, keeping information private, right? Because there is such a thing as, like, I don't know, I don't know the right word, right? But like something along the lines of like plausible deniability, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you don't know something, you technically can't be held accountable. But now, like, every thought that you have on the internet.
Well, be careful there. There are things that you think about that I bet you don't write down on the internet. I bet there are queries that.
Have you been on my podcast?
Well,
I don't have a filter.
Maybe I'm speaking for myself. There are definitely things that I think, oh, that would be interesting to know, but I'm not going to query it like that in Google because I don't want any IP address that I've ever been associated with to have that particular string of words and characters. So I might break it down into 2 or 3 different queries in different places. different
It
machine.
also kind of begs the difference in a very similar topic, right? But I've never heard, and Atlassian doesn't disclose, right? But it would be very interesting if Atlassian were to disclose any subpoenas for data, right? Because you hear the court
Mhm.
system, like I was just watching with Epic versus Apple. I don't know if you've been following along.
Mhm.
They've been arguing over the App Store, right? Well, the judge, because Apple just gave the big middle finger to the judge in San Francisco, the judge is like, I want everything. I want every email. But the conversations aren't happening in emails anymore.
No.
They're happening in Looms. They're happening in Confluence pages. They're in tickets, right? So it'd be interesting to see how as Atlassian starts to own more and more of the communication of a company, what of that data becomes now subject to court rulings, and how long do you hold data onto? Do you even hold onto data, and what
Yep.
that all looks like in the future?
Yeah. I've seen been places that had requests to delete all attachments from issues once they were completed in their final status. Just get rid of it all. Plausible deniability again.
But then I cross reference that with, like, I've seen Jira tickets with, like, we're on number 40,655, the ticket number, and they still have all 40,000 in the repository just to hold on, because just for fun, right? Just to have
Yeah. Well, that comes down to a different topic, which is that it's a lot easier to have permission to add data than it is to remove it. Adding data is always like, yeah, sure, we've already got a few gigabytes, add another gigabyte. It's just space. Deleting data is like, oh, I don't know, maybe we're going to use that issue from 15 years ago, it could be.
It would be interesting if Atlassian had like a policy, though, very similar to like email retention, right? Because legally you have to hold onto your emails for an X number of time before they no longer can be used in a court of law. So it'd be interesting if Atlassian, like maybe for an enterprise feature, introduces like a Jira ticket auto deletion.
There you go. See, there's the next product feature that we're thinking of. We're just generating companies. We're left, right, center here.
Matt's just like writing down every idea that I have.
I am. They're all mine. I'm going to be you to the domain names.
Talk about privacy.
All right. Okay, come on then. Let's have the next slide. Let's see what it was. I think it's the training slide. It is. Comes down to the people and their education. So people, if people are not thinking, people are going to put secret stuff everywhere. I'm quite sure that in all your the work that needed clearance as well, Alex, that you had all sorts of cases every day where people just weren't thinking, and they just put the wrong information in the wrong place, and then they had to be redirected and retrained, and gosh. So this is the point in this presentation where usually I'd have people put up their hands about, does just telling somebody once fix it? No, it doesn't. But we do have to start there. We do have to train people. And in the end, I think training that we give about this kind of thing is half about what you should do and the process you're expected to follow. And then it's half about training people in the way to think. Think hard about the data that you're putting into an issue before you just click submit. And as a tangent on this is one of the reasons I have concerns about issues created from Slack and issues created from email, because it's just so easy. People just put crap into their issues, and then if they had to do it through a little separate UI, maybe they'll think about it a bit more. That's what I believe.
Now, what do you think of the new AI capability where it's going to, like, you feed it a Confluence document and it's going to spit out all the requirements for you?
Yeah. Well, if you go through and modify it and check the requirements, perhaps if you just hit submit, you've just increased the noise massively in your system without really helping people in particular, especially if they don't know that it's generated. I mean, it's one thing to have a warning at the top that says that this is an automatically generated summary. But if I spend my time reading through a page and then I only realize when I get to the bottom of it that something was off because it was not a great summary, auto summary, then that's kind of wasting my time. It's annoying.
For this slide here to work, though, doesn't a company need to have like a baseline of what they deem to be good versus bad data so that they can train on that?
Exactly, which comes back to that slide a few ones earlier about having a plan and documenting it and updating it. Because if you don't have somewhere that people can refer to, when I have a question in my head and I say, oh, is it okay to store a customer's credit card number? And you say no. Then I say, well, what about if I put it on two separate lines? What about if I split it in half and put it in two separate issues? Is that okay? Is that secure enough? I want to have somewhere where I can go and find this kind of information. And it'll say, no, don't be a dummy. That's still not okay because it could be glued back together.
Yeah.
Kind of
Well, not only that, and another topic we haven't even talked about, right, is we got the people that are need to know. We got the company Atlassian themselves, since ultimately they own the data.
Yeah.
But there's a third scenario that we haven't really discussed, and that is that of impersonation. Because there's two levels to this, right? As a Jira admin, I can impersonate any non-admin and see whatever data they can see. But then there's also the external impersonation, right? My account could be hacked, and now me as an admin, right, the access that I have as an admin, now somebody can go in and see the data like a bad third-party actor.
Right, which is why the most worrying CVs in the last 6 months have all been about that one that you could just create the new admin. That was the one; those were the ones that really worried me in the Atlassian tools, because once you're admin, I mean, it's the same as once you've got physical access to the machine, isn't it? You're in, and anything that you thought was secure is no longer.
Right. Which is, I guess, why Atlassian's putting a big emphasis on something like Atlassian Guard, where at least from that perspective it should help. Because and I kind of feel like that's a smart move from Atlassian now, because if they introduce like a purge button, you wouldn't want a non-verified user to have the authority to hit that purge button.
No, absolutely not. The other thing is that realistically, if I'm thinking about the risks to most Atlassian systems, like any systems, the risks are internal. You remember was it part of WikiLeaks, or was it some other thing where all the CIA internal hacking tools were leaked as a huge big document?
I think that would have been WikiLeaks.
Yeah, and you look at that, and you can tell it's a Confluence PDF export from somebody internally who had permission, had that admin on that space. They generated this big uncomfortable document, and off it went. So that wasn't even, well, it probably was an admin, wasn't it? Because you have to export in Confluence.
I mean, it doesn't even need to be an admin, right? It could be a disgruntled employee. It could be somebody who got fired. It could be somebody who's quitting.
Somebody who's being blackmailed. Somebody's being pressured. Yeah.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I don't know if you heard of the OPM hack back in like 2014, 2015 timeframe. Are you familiar with OPM? Do you know who OPM is? So it's the Office of Personnel Management for the United States government. They basically take care of the security clearances for cleared individuals.
Oh, yeah.
And when you get a security clearance, you put every piece of information out there. There is nothing that the U.S. government doesn't know about me and my wife at this point.
Right. I have a family member who went through that.
Yeah. So they know everything. Especially, I had a top secret clearance, so like they really knew everything, right? Like they go deep. But when that hack happened, they brushed it off as like, oh, no big deal. Here's a year of free identity protection. You're good, right?
What? You mean the OPM was hacked and they were just like, here, have a T-shirt?
Yeah, here. It was the most like basic thing, right? But my biggest fear was always on the blackmail side, because you have to disclose every family member, international and non-international, right? Specifically, your non-international family members, right? And it is so easy for this data to fall in the wrong hands and say, hey, I got a brother who lives in a foreign country, or I got a sister who is not being held up for ransom unless you go get me some data. Right. And I just think it was such an oversight that people don't really appreciate. Like, you gotta almost be paranoid nowadays.
Well, you see, this is why I feel it's reasonable to be a bit scared of some of this data and where it's gone, because all that data, you can see why it was gathered, because it's the right thing to do, is to make you not as vulnerable, they feel. Because if they know about it, then they're like, oh, well, he knows that we know, so he's not going to feel that he's blackmailable. But what if that data's all leaked out? Then you're blackmailable by someone else. Yeah.
Right.
Awful. Awful stuff. So
maybe the Amish got it correct. Let's just get offline. I keep telling people that there's going to be a day when I retire and I'm not gonna have internet. Like no phones, no internet. I'm just gonna
You're
go
just going
back.
to nuke the Gmail account of the last 30 years.
My dream
Every
is to
email's gone.
my dream is to just get like an alfalfa farm and just work a farm, just in the
Oh,
middle
you're
of like
going to want to track your yield in a spreadsheet online somewhere and share it with others. There's
I
going to
just
be a whole community of alfalfa farmers about the data
how
on
to
your
survive.
crop.
No, I literally just want to. I dream of a day where I unplug from the internet as I sail into my retirement.
Funny that, because I think my dream as I look forward, and I'm closer to retirement than you are, is that I'd be helping people with the internet and with the newer features, because I feel a little bit of guilt in my career that I've developed some of these things that are not easy for senior people to use, like older family members, just older members of the community. And if I spend my time helping them and providing feedback for these products, then your life will be easier for everyone to use it.
I
But
can see that.
you know,
All right,
no.
on to the next
Anyway,
one.
next one, please. Yes, let's see. All right, so some general ideas here for people who are just starting out on this. The words governance, the words PII are good starting places. Atlassian doesn't really have any kind of prescriptions for this, though. Like a lot of Atlassian approach things, they'll tell you how their stuff works, but they won't tell you exactly how to use it. That's part of the flexibility. Part of the success story for Atlassian is that you get to use it in the way you want to use it. So educate yourself about this. There's a few links from within the Atlassian community about different things that touch on this. Dave Rosenland's talk from a month ago in Vegas. I couldn't find a link to it, but it was good, so you can ping Dave. And oh yeah, there's 2 more slides. So this is the penultimate. As I mentioned earlier on, I have had to try removing data that hadn't been intended to be removed. And I just never found a great way to do it. You can throw all the AI you like at it, but just being able to be really confident that you've identified every piece of problematic data, very tough. So this, I think, has been a shift in the last 5 years, mostly triggered by GDPR, but other factors as well, to where we have systems that are designed from the beginning to be able to delete data and specific kinds of data. And that's good. And that's encouraging for me to see that we've changed our system architectures.
We need the DuckDuckGo of Jira.
Something like that. Not that DuckDuckGo is perfect or entirely as private as people think. It's not a magic wand. But yes, the idea that we should be able to remove information is a long-standing, well, it started off as humorous and jokey films 50 years ago, but now it's a real challenge for our society. You talk about dropping the internet, but does that do us any good if we're all still there? If your data hasn't been removed,
Right? Yeah.
you can treat data like radioactive material actually, and talk about a half-life of data. Certainly the searchability in Google, and if it's not searchable in Google, then does it exist? Yeah, that's another whole discussion path, isn't it?
It makes you wonder though, will eventually our data be buried in the noise, right? Because I remember coming online, right? Like I was 10 years old when I got the internet for the first time. And you couldn't do a whole lot. Like, there was data, but there was not a whole lot of data. But and then we see it even with our pictures, right? So I was just at a family gathering this past weekend. I went to Phoenix for the Atlassian event. You may have seen Cotter Jira Life last Thursday.
Yeah.
I stopped by my cousin's house and I had pictures from 2004, 2003 that they had never seen. Right? I took these pictures and I had maybe a couple dozen pictures that they were just like, wow. They were just like in awe of like this memory that is 20 years later. They're like, wow, I look so young, right? But then I fast forward to the amount of pictures I take on a daily basis. It elapses like an entire every picture I took in 2004, I probably took in the month of May. right? And so the point I was trying to make is like, do you wonder, like in 10, 15, 20 years, the data that we put out there today is just going to be dwindled by the amount of petabytes of data we make in a day?
Right, right. So it'll just, that's another way that the data gets eliminated. It's just flooded. But then, you know, you can draw comparisons with with archaeology and how people will become data archaeologists and extracting data from the earlier layers of.
That'll be the next private investigator career.
Yeah, I know, that's a fascinating thought. I mean, there is some already with the Wayback Machine and questions like that. But there are definitely photos that were on the web 5 years ago of older family members of my family, and they're not there anymore. They're gone, or they've disappeared behind a paywall, and it's not clear which paywall I should be using. So I guess I see the data as more transient anyway. People believe that it lasts forever, but you know, even CDs and DVDs, they don't last as long as a vinyl record, right?
Right.
So data's going to go as well. It's just a tool. All right, I think we've got one last slide. Yeah, we have. This is a good discussion slide. I put this in because I really want to see what different Atlassian shops do with admins. So that's the question. Should the admins see everything? And obviously, we've been talking about scary data, and there's some data that we don't want a Jira admin to be able to see, even if they have to go through some hoops and appear in audit logs. We still just really don't want them to see. But they can, because that's how the tool is designed currently. Most places I've been still actually let all the admins see everything by default. Just because it's easier to say things like, oh, how many projects have we got? Oh, I can see all the projects as this number. Other arguments I've heard against that is that it's just too much data now. Once you get beyond a few hundred projects or spaces,
yeah, that was gonna be my 2 cents. Like, I have a team where I work with. We probably have closer to 300-400 Jira projects.
Mm-hmm.
In one instance, and then we have 22 instances of Jira.
Mm-hmm.
I have access to all of them, and I wish I had time to just sit down and go through data. That would be a dream if I could just sit there, but I don't even have the mental capacity to even peruse data that doesn't belong to me.
Right. So that's a question of understandability. It's worth restricting access for admins because you just don't want to see everything. That's a fair argument. And when you do need to see something, do you have permission to grant yourself
because
access?
I give myself my own permission, right?
Yeah. So you can do that, and it appears in an audit log if necessary.
You need, I think, what you need above the training, right? I think you did a great point with training, right? You need ethical employees as well, right? Because
yes,
I don't mind seeing all the data, but I'm going to respect the privacy of the data, right? I'm not going to go and gossip about it. I'm not going to go put it on the Jira Life, right? But you do it with it's almost like I would imagine it like a bodyguard or a Secret Service agent for the president. Can you imagine what the Secret Service agent that's around the president gets to hear or see on a day-to-day basis? But you need to have these people that have really high ethical standards to say they can filter as like, okay, no, it's not okay to ever share this.
Yeah. No, it absolutely is. My wife's a priest, so yes, there are things she'll come home and I'll say, "How was your day, honey?" And she'll say, "Well, somebody had a very difficult day, but I'm not going to tell you all about it." And I respect that. I would let her admin my Jira. So I don't think
right. So maybe companies, right, as we get into this more data-driven world, you invest more time on having good ethical standards.
Yeah. I mean, we do security training, right? All of us once a year for every company we touch, we're going to be given some afternoons training and video sessions, which are good reminders. But how do you actually test that? That's another whole level.
But now that does open up an interesting opportunity, right? Because, and I've seen this in the tech companies, the defense companies that I worked in, right? Historically, you save money, and I see this with a lot of companies actually, not even the companies I worked in, right? But there's this notion that you save so much money by outsourcing talent, right?
Yeah.
But you just need one of these incidents to go sideways on you to cost you millions of dollars worth of data loss.
Yep.
And so did you ever save the money? Because you essentially hired an untrustworthy,
It's short term and long term, right? Isn't it? You save money in the short term, in the long term, you lose more. Yeah.
I
But
wish
you're
one day I could
not
read my
going to
own
get perfect. We're not going to get perfect. This is a human problem. We're not going to be perfect, but we can reduce our risk.
It's just such an interesting, I think, again, the phenomenon of like that short-term gain of saving $1 today to increase the stock. I would like to see the stock market be much more reactive to data leaks and hacks than it is to
Oh boy.
saving
Oh
money.
boy. I think we'd see the end of Western capitalism if we were that reactive. It's a huge problem right now.
Yeah, but not to turn this into a whole cybersecurity talk, right? But like companies don't have a budget for their cybersecurity. Like they do, but it's such a limited budget compared to what you actually need.
Yeah.
Right. And it's this very same thing over here with this Jira stuff. Like the amount of resources I would get, like, let's just say that I wanted to protect things, right? I can't just flip a switch and go, okay, Jira's safe. It's going to require an investment of my time, energy, other admins, collaborations, trainings, right? These aren't things that are technically free. You have to invest resources to get to this resolution, and there's no budget for it sometimes until something goes sideways on you.
Yep. Well, that's very human, isn't it? We don't put our effort into it until we have to. So you're right. Over the next 10, 20 years, I think the budgets will be there. And not just in the way that we say at the moment, but actually in the daily, there'll be an extra overhead on everything, which will be thinking about the data, thinking about your behavior, responsibilities. Maybe more focus on responsibilities than on rights. There's a thought.
Oh, it looks like you have one more slide here for us.
I do, in fact, have two. They're both about Adaptivist. This one is about what Adaptivist will cover. Did you know Adaptivist is over 1,000 people? It's unreal. So I've been there 4 months now. About half the company is services to help other people, particularly in Atlassian, but in other communities as well. And then the other half is products, things like Script Runner and all the collective Confluence macros. And if you go to the final slide, I do like this final slide. It's just somehow very appealing, all these little arrows. And there are we over in the USA, though it's a UK company, and every other continent by the look of it now. Not South America.
No love for South America, though.
Not yet. So if you want to make some money, you can probably predict there'll be an acquisition down there at some point in the next year or two as well. Cool.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And
of course,
anytime. I do got you scheduled here for a little later in the summer. So we'll come back for a part 2 with Matt. And thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye all.